From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush in New York City. Wicked, one of the top movies of 2024 as a metaphor for personal experience as well as the political and social struggles of 2024 and going into 2025? Why not? My colleague Guthrie Graves-Fitzsimmons will be joining me at the intersection of popular culture, fiction, and political reality on this year-end edition of The State of Belief. In 2025, we need to keep these conversations going more than ever. And so if this is something you care about, be sure to subscribe, share, and rate the State of Belief podcast at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Help more people learn that religion is meant to be a bridge, not a bludgeon, and that none of us will be alone in this dangerous time. Our library of past conversations includes well over 100 hopeful, empowering, and inspiring interviews with guests like Diana Butler-Bass, Brad Onishi, Bishop William Barber, Sharon Salzberg, and many, many others. You can help grow the State of Belief with a financial contribution. Find out how at stateofbelief.com. And you can support and join the work of Interfaith Alliance at interfaithalliance.org. Before we get started, I want to wish you a very healthy, hopeful, positive new year. I'm sending you my love, my appreciation, my gratitude for all that you are. This has been a great year. Our audience is growing. We've had incredible guests, which I'm so grateful for. There are so many good people in this country. There are so many powerful people from all walks of life who are coming together in this moment. There is so much we can do together. And so, even as we approach a difficult moment in our nation's history, we are not powerless. We are powerful. Join us, join together, find places where you can come together with other people and show up, raise your voice, and let's meet this moment together. And I think today's show is really going to help us think about that. And now to my guest. Guthrie Graves-Fitzsimmons is the very effective and charismatic Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy at Interfaith Alliance. He holds an MDiv and is working towards his Doctorate of Ministry in Prophetic Leadership, which has him thinking about more than just temporal matters, important as they may be. He's been doing some insightful writing about his favorite story, The Wizard of Oz prequel titled Wicked, in the context of the Christian season of Advent. And I thought that this would be a perfect theme for our last episode of the year. And so, Guthrie Graves-Fitzsimmons, Wicked superfan, welcome to the State of Belief.
I'm so happy to be back on the show, Paul, and to talk about my favorite musical, my favorite book. Wicked is at the top of every list of mine when it comes to pop culture and fiction. And so I'm so excited to be here to talk to you about it.
Oh my God. Well, you are the moment. Let's start with the book because you and I both read the book when it came out and felt like, wow, this is real. Like it was one of those immersive book experiences where you're like, I am taken into a world that I thought I knew. And yet everything is different. So tell me about when you first encountered the book. You were fairly young then.
Yeah, the book came out in 1995, which is interesting for us at Interfaith Alliance. It came out the year after Interfaith Alliance was founded, so we're about the same age as an organization. I don't remember the exact year I read it. I obviously didn't. I was 5 in 1995, so it wasn't then. But it was as a teenager that I discovered the book. And it deeply resonated with me. And I think it was I didn't have a strong association with the source material and The Wizard of Oz. So I discovered this story about the same time that I, saw the Wizard of Oz movie and was given this alternative history of the Wicked Witch of the West. And it became my favorite book and it stayed atop the list all these years later.
I read it pretty much, noting our age difference. I did read it pretty much when it came out. And it was just a very strong, flipping of history. Now, I, of course, again, my age, I grew up on The Wizard of Oz, and like it was a huge deal. And this is back in the age of television when we would wait all year for The Wizard of Oz to show. Like you couldn't just decide you wanted to watch it. You had to wait until it was showing on broadcast TV. And it was a big deal in our house. And I remember being terrified of the witch, terrified of that scene where she's attacking Dorothy and all of this. And so I was really enmeshed in it. I read all the Oz books. I was very in that world. But then to see someone flip it or maybe bring it back. I don't know what exactly. So when you read that also, like, it's interesting because if it was in your teen years, it was probably about when you became aware that you might be gay, that you might be different, that somehow people had labeled you and put you somewhere. There's an interesting sort of connection that this story has. So I want to get to that. But before we go further, in more detail, let's do a basic outline of the story we're dealing with, which is, and I'll give the story of The Wizard of Oz, which is was so, big in my life, which is essentially this poor innocent girl from Kansas gets dropped into this world that is totally different. Dropped literally, the house lands on a witch, kills a witch, and then all of a sudden that witch's sister comes in and says, "Who killed my sister?" She said, I didn't mean to. And poor Dorothy is trying to get back to Kansas, and Glinda, this good witch, says, "You got to go to the Wizard of Oz to help. He's the only one who can help you get back to Kansas." Well, the quote unquote Wicked Witch of the West is, "You killed my sister. I'm gonna be after you." And so this sets up this big battle between quote unquote good and evil. And Dorothy, innocent Dorothy, is trying to get the Wizard of Oz. The wizard says you have to get the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West, which basically means you have to kill her in order for me to help you. Dorothy does that. Dorothy goes there with the intention of killing her, ends up being successful in a famous scene where she pours water onto the Wicked Witch of the West, and then whose demise is witnessed, and then takes the broom, goes back to the Wizard of Oz. It turns out the Wizard of Oz is a phony, but eventually she has these magic slippers. She clicks them 3 times. She goes, back to Kansas. End of story. La, 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 la. So Wicked takes that broad outline and gives us all kinds of context, which is completely lacking. Take it from there. I think it's, because I really want to get into these, what it means to have dueling histories and who is at the center of the story and whose story matters, so go ahead bring us up to date with Wicked.
So what Gregory Maguire, who's the novelist who wrote Wicked, does is tells us what is the Wicked Witch of the West and her backstory. How did she end up wicked? How did she end up evil? Was she born that way, or did the circumstances of her life lead her to end up as the Wicked Witch? And so the story goes back to her birth, the surprise of her parents that she's green-skinned, and what that means for her life, and how ostracized she is and is very alone. She goes off to university where she meets Glinda, who becomes the good witch that you referenced in the Wizard of Oz story. And at first they don't necessarily get along, but then they befriend each other. Elpheba learns to study sorcery and wants to go and meet the wizard and really looks up to the wizard, but also comes to terms with the wizard's political machinations and authoritarianism that the wizard oversees in Oz. And so Elpheba goes through this journey of self-discovery herself, to come to terms with her own power, her own ability to stand up to the wizard. So that's about the story of Act 1 that we see in this new movie with Cynthia Erivo as Elpheba. And then the story goes from there to get to the point where Dorothy melts her. And from there, there's actually several follow-up sequels that Gregory Maguire wrote about Elpheba's son and the continuing story in Oz.
Yeah. I think even what you've already laid out is so interesting because, you've used the term wicked witch of the West, but the term wicked was not something she gave to herself. It was applied to her as an intention. We've decided that this person, specifically because they are defying the will of the wizard, is described as wicked. I was talking to my son, Walter, about like history, and he had heard the term like the winner gets to write the history. And he was like, what does that mean? History is history. And I'm like, well, yes. And there's different people who decide what actually happened. And so you have to figure out what perspective are you looking for? We're going to go back and forth between like what this movie talks about, but also real life, where like we are in a moment where such different histories are honestly in a struggle to figure out like, what is our history? Whose history matters? How do we describe our history? Who are the protagonists? That's part of the reason like education is such a location of struggle in this moment with book bans, with people attacking curriculum. I mean, this is our work. So it's very interesting how the work that we both are so passionate about is also reflected in this idea of whose story are we telling?
Exactly. And I think there is so much here, especially as a gay man, that resonates. Gregory Maguire, who wrote the Wicked book, is gay himself and Catholic. I was reading a reflection he did for New Ways Ministry, which is a Catholic LGBTQ ministry that actually published this morning, the day we're recording this program. And he said, quote, I think many younger people growing up now in an era of accessibility and of identity politics can't imagine how abandoned, shipwrecked a gay boy in a Catholic high school could feel, as alone as a green-skinned Elpheba, isolated with no peers in a world of safely ordinary citizens, end quote. And he said, when people ask me if Elpheba is based on myself, I say every strength of Elpheba's is my ambition, and nearly every weakness is a self-portrait.
Wow. Thank you for that. That's really amazing.
And I think even though at the time I read it, I was coming to terms with my own gay identity, wrestling with religion. Maguire writes about how his Catholic faith was actually something that helped him navigate homophobia and coming out, which is part of my own story. And then also solidarity with all oppressed peoples. The real turn that Elpheba, the Wicked Witch of the West, has, she looks up to the wizard and looks up to the wanting to learn from him. He's the ruler of Oz, the great wizard. And what the turning point for her is her own solidarity with animals. And there are animals that can talk. She has a professor who's a goat, Dr. Dillamon, and she feels very strongly in solidarity with the anti-animal oppression that's an allegory for the many different types of oppression we face in the real world. But there's a whole effort by the wizard to single out animals, to stop them from talking, to rid them of their jobs, to kill animals. Now, we're talking about the book. It's a PG movie of kind of an R-rated book. So there's some changes in the movie. But that theme of Elpheba feeling ostracized because of her green skin, but seeing the solidarity with other oppressed peoples and turning on the political powers is the core of the dramatic arc of the movie. And I think the reason so many of us are engaged in social justice activism and why the book resonated. And yes, there's a love story and a love triangle and other elements that people really like about this story. But it's that social justice activism and commitment and movement that Elpheba is a part of. She's really a movement leader, but not just because of her green skin that makes her feel so alone and ostracized, but on behalf of the animals and other people who are facing discrimination in Oz.
I've read commentary by Jewish scholars who are also looking at this movie and saying, that's very much resonant with a kind of Holocaust narrative where all of a sudden a group has decided, okay, we're going to go after them. and we're going to make them the problem. We're going to take away their jobs. We're going to, erode their opportunities and eventually try to get rid of them altogether. It's a terrifying idea, but you can see how acquiescent people can be to such terrible things once you realize, oh, they're the problem. All of these parallels are so disturbing in our time with, if we think about like the way immigrants have been scapegoated and, this idea, they're all criminals and they're all eating our pets and all of this kind of stuff. All that rhetoric, and then we're going to round them up and we're going to get rid of them. They're the problem. I do think like there may be some people listening saying, okay, this is a stretch. But this is actually like at the core of the book. This is really an important principle. As you mentioned, the story arc and how she changed and how she decided, okay, I'm going to do something different. And I'm not going to let you decide for me who I am. Up next, more with Guthrie Graves-Fitzsimmons, Interfaith Alliance Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. You'll also find links to topics we discussed this week, as well as transcripts and more. And make sure you subscribe at stateofbelief.com/subscribe. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. Welcome back to The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush. I'm joined by Interfaith Alliance Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy, Guthrie Graves-Fitzsimmons. Talk to me a little bit about the music. Now, you promised you would not sing, but I may I know you may break into song at any moment, but are there songs in particular? I mean, we're moving from the book to the musical, which, on Broadway is unbelievably moving. And then in the movie. So are there songs that also underscore some of these ideas that we're talking about?
Sure. I do want to first touch on that idea that this is too far. This is kind of a stretch or outside of what we usually talk about. And really, this story is the core of why I'm here working at Interfaith Alliance. And I think fiction allows us space to kind of explore these themes in a way that's not as on the nose and divisive. So we see these characters and we're able to talk about good and evil. We're able to talk about social justice and solidarity in a way that's more accessible. And with all the music, it goes down easier. There's right after the book came out, they were going to make a dramatic movie about it. But then Stephen Schwartz, who did Godspell, which is another one of my favorite musicals, came to Gregory Maguire with the pitch for turning it into a stage musical because people sang in Oz, in The Wizard of Oz, and thought the music would really bring this to life. And the music is so powerful from the very opening number, which the musical starts with Elpheba's death, being melted by Dorothy, and a huge number with people rejoicing at her death. And it really opens this question of why are people so glad that she's dead? Who was she? And someone asked Glinda, the good witch, Elpheba's friend, was she born wicked or did she have wickedness thrust upon her? And that's the whole setting the stage of the musical, this big rejoicing number of called No One Mourns the Wicked. And yet I think it opens our thinking to why do people believe differently than us? Why do people come to different conclusions about policy and politics than us? And can we have cognitive empathy, which is one of my professors in seminary, Robert Wright, talks a lot about having cognitive empathy to not justify the actions of others, but to have empathy for why they come to those decisions and try to think through it.
This reminds me, just let me interject. Have you ever seen Mr. Rogers interviewing the actress who played the Wicked Witch of the West?
I have not.
Oh my God, you have got to see it because he has her on his show and he talks to her as the actress and said, "You were very scary for people. But tell us about the Wicked Witch of the West and what it was like to become that person, but also why was she?" And and the actress whose name I'm blanking, but it's like she was so good and so wonderful. And she said, "Well, she just doesn't get what she wants." And she really humanized it. And also, like, it was just like, it was such a Mr. Rogers moment where all of a sudden, like, you were like, oh, and so that was for me like one of those first moments where I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But it goes back to this question of empathy. How do we talk to one another? And how do we maybe actually make space for someone's story who we've decided their story doesn't matter?
Those are big questions, and love the example of Mr. Rogers. It's not all doom and gloom in the musical and talk of authoritarianism and social justice. There's also more fun and uplifting numbers, like Popular, when Elpheba and Glinda become friends at school. Glinda, who is the most popular girl in their class, and gives Elphaba a makeover, but it still has a political slant to it. There's a verse that I'll just read the lyrics. When I see depressing creatures with unprepossessing features, I remind them on their own behalf to think of celebrated heads of state or especially great communicators. Did they have brains or knowledge? Don't make me laugh. They were popular.
Wow. That I actually think has real resonance.
It shows you how people get into power is based on this just vibes largely. And it's a lesson to Elphaba in we are trying to make a difference. You have to acknowledge that reality of the way people react to leadership is based on that style and popularity generally, not always brains and knowledge.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you about Wicked was you actually connected this to your faith tradition, which is as a Christian. And you, at one point, you actually wrote like an Advent series about it. Isn't that right? Like you actually thought that Christians could learn something and connect this with the story of Jesus's coming and birth and some of what we, observe as Christians in the lead up to Christmas. Can you talk a little bit about that? And what were some of the themes that you touched on and also how that was received?
Yes, thank you for asking. Our friends at Word and Way, which is a Baptist publication, asked me to write a Advent devotional. And at the time, the most viral internet meme what came from an interview with Cynthia Erivo, who plays Elphaba, and Ariana Grande, who plays Glinda. And they were doing an interview about the movie. And the interviewer, who worked in queer media, asked them about what their reaction was to people holding space for the lyrics of Defying Gravity. And it just became this huge meme because Cynthia Erivo has this kind of overly emotional reaction and seems really stunned by the question. Ariana Grande kind of awkwardly holds Cynthia's index finger while she's having the reaction. And it was this, they did tons of interviews about the movie, but this moment went viral. And I actually think while people are making fun of the idea of holding space and kind of sitting and meditating or reflecting on the lyrics of Defying Gravity, that song has meant so much to me that I took it as an opportunity to write my Advent devotional about the lyrics of Defying Gravity, because I think that's such a beautiful way to put what Elphaba is doing in the musical, that there is this gravity of Oz's authoritarianism, the wizard, the injustice she sees. There's so much weighing on her. And her own ambition is weighing on her because the wizard is offering her, if she goes along with his political project, access to power. Her professor that is tutoring her in sorcery is an accomplice of the wizard. There's so much of her own ambition weighing on her, standing up to the wizard. And then the tools of the state. Surveillance is a theme. Religion is a theme in the book, not so much in the musical. All of this is weighing on her. It is this gravity. It is not something that is visible to our eye, but there's a way in which that political climate weighs on you. And she is defying that. She is saying, that will not hold me down. Of course, she has this fantastical ability to fly as a witch, but we all have the chance to fly and counteract that pressing gravity on us. And so that's why I wanted to offer this reflection, especially during Advent, as Christians prepare to welcome the birth of Christ, who defied so much, defied the political and religious teachings of his time, defied death in the resurrection. Christ teaches Christians how to defy everything that keeps us from who God created us to be. So I thought I was going to lean into this viral internet moment and hopefully find something to help us reflect during Advent.
That's amazing. So you made space for, folks to think deeply about defying gravity. And I do think it's we can talk a little bit about the reality that we are like this facing come in 2025 and what what the incoming administration has promised to do and already seems to be activating in a lot of their nominations and a lot of the rhetoric that we're hearing. So, I think, one of the things we've talked about, and, when I had on a couple of weeks ago, I had Timothy Snyder on, and he was like, the worst thing we can do is to begin to adopt the mindset of Trump and assume everything he wants to do, he's going to be able to do, and that our best move now is just to accept it and figure out how to adapt to that new reality, but basically accept his reality and his vision. And he's saying, you can't accept his vision. You have to defy the vision. You have to maintain your vision in order to maintain a sense of clarity and moral clarity about what you have to do in the face of it, in the face of this incoming, effort to marginalize people, to target people, to to deny people basic rights. And so I do think defying gravity in some ways is actually a really, an appropriate anthem for 2025.
It is. And there is a reason Trump won based on, he won the popular vote and has a certain political appeal, but the restrictive policies that he is trying to implement are not popular. And I think we have to remember that he has no policy mandate right now to implement these terrible policies. And to go back to Wicked, the Wizard of Oz does a lot to impress people in the book and in the musical and, win over popular support. But the actual policies and the surveillance state that's being imposed, the extrajudicial killings, the marginalization of the animals, all of those things are what's being done surreptitiously while he does all of the pizzazz and the impressing people. So I think there's so much to see in Wicked that prepares us for Trumpism. We have to stay focused, not let Trump change the game. Trump himself has already been talking about how everyone's trying to be nice to him. He's putting forth this message that now everybody loves him, which he won the popular vote narrowly, yes. And we know that so much of what he's going to implement, we can stop. Very thin margins in Congress right now. Yes, the Republicans control the House and the Senate and the Supreme Court, but there are many avenues to raise opposition and resistance to the worst of what he's going to try to implement.
I see like this almost juxtaposition between popular and defying gravity, and one of the great catchphrases. I mean, we used to say it all the time, like "pay no attention to the man behind the curtain." I mean, it's a different, but that's like that was the real, like, look at the real man who's using all these levers to distract and impress and intimidate. But there's like a tiny man behind there who realizes his own frailty and who realizes his limitations, but can't let anybody see it. And I really do think this is one of those great cultural moments. And I think it means something, what a great cultural moment it is. And it means something that it means something. And I don't know if you saw this, but, the Million Moms group, which is, just a very, very conservative group that uses motherhood to weaponize against, a lot of people. They've decided a boycott is their only hope here. So they've called for a boycott of Wicked, which, good luck with that. I mean, I'll just say, like, all of my kids have seen it and their friends have all seen it. And, there's a hope there. One of the characters that is really important that, obviously we didn't learn anything about her in the original Wizard of Oz is Nessa, who is the sister of Elpheba. And that's a really interesting character who's on the scene in Wicked.
It is. And it really hit me when my nephew, who has a disability, went with my sister to see Wicked. I'm so excited that future generations are experiencing this great story, and was really moved by seeing Nessa, who uses a wheelchair in the movie, was also played for the first time in the musical's 21-year history by someone who is a wheelchair user. The actress, Marissa Bode, who plays her, is also a wheelchair user. So to see that representation for the disability community meant a lot to my nephew, and I know to the larger disability community.
And what does it mean for her? Like, this is actually like really important. That's another story. That's another reality. That's another like experience that through storytelling we get to, begin to develop empathy for and understand her also as an important character.
And Elphaba has a lot of concern for her as her sister who uses a wheelchair. And Maguire has talked about being impacted by the AIDS crisis when he's writing this. Again, he's writing this in the early 90s, and talks about Elphaba as someone who cares for others and cares for the vulnerable. And so that's expressed in one way, not just for her care for the animals, but in taking care of her sister and providing support to her and her disability.
You kind of touched on it, but what are 5 lessons from Wicked that we can carry into 2025 where, this show is being shown right before the turn of the new year. And, for a lot of people, 2025 is, carries a lot of dread coming. But, as you said, this is the 30th anniversary of the book. The musical has been going strong for so long on Broadway. I mean, it was one of the first things that my niece, she was like, I don't even know how many years ago, maybe a decade ago, she was like, I want to see Wicked. I mean, like, there's a there for all of us. So tell me about your take on 5 moral, spiritual principles, ideas from Wicked that we can take into 2025 to meet the new year as well as we can, inspired by Wicked.
Thanks for asking that, Paul. Number 1, don't be intimidated by a seemingly all-powerful force. Be inspired by Elphaba standing up to the Wizard of Oz, who projected this aura of invincibility, but Elphaba saw through it. She knew that she could defy that power, and so can you. Number 2, trust yourself, even if you have to go it alone. Elphaba sings in Defying Gravity, and if I'm flying solo, at least I'm flying free. Know that sometimes we have to break free from institutions and whatever is holding us back to find our own power. Number 3, Look for love and friendship and comrades in unlikely places, and be open to what other people who have different experiences can teach you if you let them. Elpheba befriends Glinda in this very unlikely way, and although they are trying to make a difference in unique ways, they value the different perspectives that each offers. Number 4, find solidarity with people who are facing other forms of oppression from what you're facing, and connect your own struggles with what they're facing, creating a common solidarity and alliance to take on the political leaders who are dividing us for their own political gain. Elpheba feels ostracized for her own green skin, but connects that to the plight of the animals and how the wizard is targeting them and makes their cause her own. And number 5, find power in telling your own stories and the stories of others. Elpheba turns back after fleeing the wizard and the police who are trying to arrest her, and turns back and declares, to those who ground me, take a message back from me about how I'm defying gravity. And she not only tells her own story, but connects that to everybody else, singing that everyone deserves the chance to fly. And through that, she opens the door to people pushing back against oppressive narratives and telling so many new and different stories, even though the wizard is trying to censor them.
Well, there you have it, people. Okay, so we are going to, let's see if I can repeat. We're going to try to see through a facade of invincibility, because it's a tactic. We're going to find our own power and make sure that we realize how much power each of us has in this moment, and to be true to ourselves and not let anyone deny our power. And even as we do that, number 3, we're going to find joy in friendships, even with people who are very different from us. People have different things to learn from us. So that's like awesome. And number 4, what was number 4? Oh, number 4 was find solidarity with people who may not be going through what you're going through, but actually you are connected to them, and we have to show up for one another in 2025 for anybody who is being targeted or for whatever reason. And number 5 is ask what the story is, and is that the real story, or is there another part of the story that we can learn from, that we can share, and that we can celebrate, and make sure that we don't just censor stories. So all of that is directly connected with the work that you and I are going to be doing next year with so many other people. That's the other thing. Like, you know, the great thing about these stories is that they remind us that we're not going it alone. You and I know how many colleagues, how many friends, how many people listening to this podcast are also like out there. And we're part of a large movement of people who are going into 2025 saying, we are going to still achieve democracy together. We are still going to see the America that we dream of. And I just am so grateful to you for your deep dive into Wicked. And for all of our listeners, thank you for such a great year. 2024 has been up and down, and lots of different things have happened, but it's been a really important year in the life of Interfaith Alliance, 30 years that we've celebrated. We've seen so many of you. We appreciate you. We love you. And, let's all go out there and defy gravity and achieve democracy together. Okay? Thank you. And thank you to Guthrie Graves-Fitzsimmons for joining us today on The State of Belief.
Thank you, Paul.
Now, I'm sure you know someone who'd get a lot out of these conversations, so please share The State of Belief with them, and be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. We need your help to keep making The State of Belief. If you'd like to make a financial contribution, go to stateofbelief.com. That is stateofbelief.com. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. The State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. We will be talking about January 6th, the Christian nationalism that inspired it, and why it's such a travesty that they are considering pardoning those who attacked our Capitol and attacked our democracy in 2021. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Raushenbush on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.